The Middle East is on fire. That is an objective observation. It happens to be the title of nearly the title of our show today, the Firestorm in Lebanon. Others are going to use it. You're going to hear shortly. But man, that is the absolute accurate description. Physically, the place is just getting burned to the ground. It is the most violence is being done in Lebanon since the Lebanese Civil War, starting in the 1970s and moving up for like 15 years after that. It is unbelievable what's been going on in Lebanon with the Lebanese civilians. This is not just Hezbollah. Lots of Lebanese are paying the price on this. And one of the things that right off the top that Israel is saying why this is happening, we'll just say it's a matter of interpretation. But because it's important to understand what both sides are saying and what all the different participants believe, we're going to start off with Benjamin Netanyahu, and then we're going to bring on Larry Johnson to help us unpack some of this stuff. We'll be with Larry right on the backside of this clip.
I have a message for the people of Lebanon. Israel's war is not with you. It's with Hezbollah. For too long, Hezbollah has been using you as human shields. It placed rockets in your living rooms and missiles in your garage. Those rockets and missiles are aimed directly at our cities, directly at our citizens. To defend our people against Hezbollah strikes, we must take out those weapons. Now, starting this morning, the IDF has warned you to get out of harm's way. I urge you, take this warning seriously. Don't let Hezbollah endanger your lives and the lives of your loved ones. Don't let Hezbollah endanger Lebanon. Please, get out of harm's way now. Once our operation is finished, you can come back safely to your homes.
All right, Larry, then now what Netanyahu's going to do here is present himself as a very rational, very reasonable, very helpful person. And this is something that's forced on us. We don't have any choice in the matter here because these bad actors are doing all these things. And I plead with you, Lebanese people, please don't get in harm's way. Please leave. How do you react when you see that?
Well, we got 11 months of evidence from what the Israelis did to the Palestinians, to Hamas in Gaza. Hey, listen, you people need to clear out this neighborhood. Go to this safe area. You'll be safe there. And then what do? They bombed the safe area. They killed them in the camps where they were told to gather. It's almost like a deer hunter illegally putting out a salt lick. You know, you're not supposed to do that where you attract the deer come to it and you can shoot them. That's what Israel's doing. You know, oh, you can come back to your homes. Of course, we will have blown the hell out of them and there'll be scattered pieces all around. So good luck building that back. But no, Netanyahu and Israel have no credibility in this. You know, the thing that's really changed, Danny, from the war in 2006 and then the Civil War back into the 80s, is this is the first war that between Hezbollah and Israel that is being driven by religious fanaticism. And what I mean by religious fanaticism is there are within the Zionists in Israel the belief that they are living in the end of times. There are also within the ranks of Hezbollah some who also believe they are living in the end of times, and there are Christians who insist we're living in the end of time. So this religious motivation. Now, on the Christian side, they already believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and they're waiting for the return of the Messiah. The Jews don't believe the Messiah has come, and they believe there must be all this suffering and warfare and killing in order to bring back the Messiah. So this is not these military decisions or these decisions to use violence are not being made strictly according to military doctrine and something you'd learn at the War College. This is stuff that's coming right out of the Torah and out of the Talmud, and that they're using it to actually guide some of the decision making, which is, in my view, crazy. But that's what makes it so dangerous.
As someone who is a genuine Christian follower of Jesus, the Bible and the Talmud actually don't say that you need to do anything. If you're actually following God and following the scriptures, that's God's purview exclusively. You don't have any role in it whatsoever. So these people that think that they're going to help God out, is just putting fuel on a fire. It's just
Yeah,
really
yeah.
embarrassing.
Yeah, and that's why I say this particular conflict, that's what makes this different from the previous ones. I mean, there would have been some of the theological, some of, if you will, the eschatological elements there, but it was not a driving force. It is now within the ranks of the settlers, the people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. Just as an example, the other day, Ben-Gvir said to Netanyahu that, hey, if you go to New York to speak at the UN and you have to travel on the Sabbath, which under, the strict Jewish interpretation of the law is a sin, he said it will be treated as a mitzvah, as a good thing. Yeah, it's okay. So that's how they're manipulating the religion to suit their own particular political needs. And in this case, they don't view the Lebanese, they don't view the Palestinians as legitimate human beings that are to be treated as creations of God. They are seen as creatures of the devil that must be destroyed.
Well, yeah, and that's I mean, no matter what lens they look through, that is what they're doing with these people, and it's just dehumanized whole categories of people, which is why we have the trouble that we're in. I want to go back a little bit more to what Netanyahu said there, because one of the things he said may have raised some eyebrows in some quarters of the Western press, especially when he said that they're holding missiles in their houses and they're putting these things in their basements. Now, there is some truth to this, but I'm going to show you something. I think it was earlier today that Daniel Hagari showed, which is going to just be a little bit deceptive. Watch this.
This is a village in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah stores cruise missiles, rockets, launchers, and UAVs inside civilian homes, hidden behind the Lebanese population living in the village. We are monitoring these activities, locating the weapons, and destroying them with precise intelligence-based strikes. I want to show you an example of a strike carried out a few weeks ago. Here we are exposing Hezbollah's method of hiding a cruise missile inside a home. The terrorists create a designated opening for the missile launch. Here you can see how we identified the terrorist making an opening in the building that exposed the missile. In a precise strike, the IDF eliminated the terrorist and this missile launching infrastructure shortly before the launch.
Now, that could well be true. I don't actually take anything at face value coming from the Israel side. That one image, but you see that he showed this computer-generated graphic, i.e., a deepfake video, that showed these missiles were in every house. So when Israel goes in and every building they destroy, they just tell you there was a missile inside there. Trust me on this, but we don't have any independent knowledge of that. Now, I just want your understanding, because from what I've read from years past is that Hezbollah does have a lot of these missiles hidden in buildings in various locations, whether buried in the side of the hillside, etc., so that they can keep them off Israeli eyes. That's not uncommon. But how do you? What is your understanding of just how pervasive that is?
While I don't have any firsthand knowledge on this front, I had a good discussion earlier today with Alistair Crook. Alistair does. He's been on the ground in southern Lebanon. He's been into actually some of the facilities that Hezbollah has. He's met with military commanders of Hezbollah back during his days working for the British government and being directly involved with a variety of peace efforts. He said what Hezbollah is especially effective at is creating decoys above ground that Israel will identify as weapon systems and attack. But it's like, remember those logs that look like artillery barrels that we were blowing up in Serbia? Same thing. But what they actually do, they've got their missiles and rockets underground, and they fire out of holes in the ground that are not readily identifiable or visible. And he says that's what they're largely using. And so a lot of what we see all these dramatic explosions above ground. Hezbollah went underground almost 20 years ago. And in the aftermath of that 2006 war, they recognized they needed to have better fortifications underground, and they built some massive, massive facilities. And they've got the added advantage, they're not dealing with a flat desert area. You got mountains and valleys.
Yeah.
And so they're able to go into these and create interconnected tunnels and fighting positions and launch positions. Up to this point, Hezbollah has only been using some of their rockets, which are not precision guided. They're gravity guided. Shoot them up in the air and they come down somewhere. But they've been ramping that up. So you're right. We've got this area on fire with Israel escalating, Israel trying to provoke Hezbollah into attacks that would justify the United States entering the fray. And Hezbollah so far has been pulling its punches. Alistair also, I think, made a really important point about the pagers that I thought about it beforehand, but I didn't have any experience. He said even back in 2006, Hezbollah was using fiber optic for communications, military communications. They weren't relying upon pagers and walkie-talkies. The pagers and walkie-talkies go to, let's call it the civilian side of Hezbollah activities, because Hezbollah in Lebanon is like a government within a government. It provides education, it provides health services, it provides social services, food, employment services. So a lot of the people carrying those pagers and walkie-talkies were, yes, involved with Hezbollah's activities, but not military activities. So instead of crippling Hezbollah from a military standpoint, it may have hurt Hezbollah in this delivery of social services, but it didn't cripple it. So again, part of this is Israel has good intelligence, but it is very, very far away from perfect intelligence.
Larry, I want to kind of interrupt for just a second, because I saw this question pop up in the commentary here. I thought it was a really good one. Has Russia sent Hezbollah any of their advanced stuff? Because Putin has been threatening for months now to arm some of our adversaries if we have, of course, armed Ukraine, which we have done. I don't know for sure if Hezbollah would fit that criteria, because this would be going against Israel, not against the United States. But do you see any evidence of that?
I have not. They would, if Russia was going to, I think, assist somebody, would be a formal country. Hezbollah is not recognized yet as an entity with a seat in the United Nations. And Russia is pretty good about following international law. I mean, they actually take that stuff pretty seriously, unlike us in the United States. But you may see it in Syria. In fact, there is before we went on air, I saw a report out of Syria that Israel was striking into Syria territory, and air defense systems there were engaging targets. So, one of these days, Israel's going to start losing some pilots, at least in Syria. I don't know in Lebanon. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah. And then, of course, Israel's been doing that into really every nation in the region for quite some time, especially Syria. I want to go to a different aspect of this. There has been reports here in recent days that the United States is sending additional military troops into the region here. There was a report out that the 101st Airborne Division is actually going into rotation, and they're heading to the Middle East there as well. More troops going into Europe. We'll talk about that separately. But when you look at where this war potentially could go, there are those in the United States that not only are not suggesting that Israel cool the jets a little bit or seek diplomacy out, but they're actually egging them on and saying, you're not going after the big bully. You need to be going after Iran, as Jack Keane suggested here earlier.
Look at where we are. I mean, Iran has operationalized all of its proxies. They've shut down the Suez Canal. Their proxies have fired ballistic missiles at U.S. warships, and we still haven't responded against Iran. 200 plus attacks against U.S. troops that are stationed in Syria and in Iraq since the beginning of this administration. I mean, the Middle East is on fire, and as Iran moves towards a nuclear weapon, we're going to have a nuclear arms race in the Middle East as a result of this administration's policy.
So you see there, it's always Iran. That's where this always goes back to. And you have Keene, of course, has been lobbying for this for a long time. John Bolton, we could have thrown some of him in there as well. But you see how he's kind of, well, deceptive here. What a shock, right? That really Israel's doing nothing wrong here. It just that the Iranians are supplying the Houthis, and they're for no reason trying to shut down shipping in the Red Sea. And the Hezbollah, for no reason, has been launching missiles even since October of last year into northern Israel. And so we need to go after Iran, because you even heard him directly make that connection. The Houthis have been doing this stuff in the Red Sea, and we haven't gone after Iran yet. So he wants to escalate into Iran. What do you say to those charges?
Well, one, we couldn't even beat the Houthis, okay? So we started Operation Prosperity Guardian middle of December of 2023. Here we are now, almost 10 months later, and we've been unable to reopen the Red Sea to traffic that's heading to Israel. We failed against a bunch of guys in sandals with curved knives on their belts. And now we're going to take on Iran. You know what this clip with Keene, and it was illustrated in your discussion last week with Ben Hodges, because these guys are military, they're experienced military guys. They're not uneducated. They're not suffering from some brain damage where they've lost, chunks of their cerebral cells and they can't think properly. They know stuff and should know better. And it was just like in your conversation with Hodges, as you tried to draw him out, he admitted and said, well, we'd never send our troops into an offensive without controlling having air superiority. Well, no kidding. So why did you back that and not, or at least not come out and acknowledge at the beginning that you're doing that to Ukraine and they were going to fail? He never makes the connection with the synapses. And so here's Jack Keene. Yeah, we need to go after Iran. And it's like, okay, wait a second. Think of this like you're wanting to make your way into the major leagues. So you start off in single A baseball, and then do you go to double A and then to triple A? Because in single A, you got to prove that you can start hitting some of the fastballs and some of the curveballs. Houthis were single A ball. We couldn't hit their fastball. Now we want to go play Iran, who's at least operating at AAA, if not major league level. It doesn't make sense. And the question is, how are we going to do that? Oh, we're going to send a battalion of airborne over. That'll do the trick.
Oh yeah, that'll scare a lot of people.
If they're going to have them compete in a push-up contest, okay, maybe they'll be, get out there and crank those babies out. But militarily, all it is simple a demonstration. It's like having a float in the Rose Bowl parade.
It harkens back to Desert Storm when Saddam Hussein first invaded Kuwait in the August of 1990. Is that the George Bush then sent the 82nd and 101st Airborne over there because they have great reputation and rapid response, and they dug trenches at the border, hoping that the armored units wouldn't come over them. And I remember when I went with the 2nd Armored Cav Regiment in there, they were still in those holes when we drove past. So those guys aren't going to stop even an antiquated armored unit like Iraq. Yeah. Certainly aren't going to do anything here either. But one of the other things I wanted to ask you about there that Keene said is that if we don't do something quick, there's going to be a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. What do you make of that?
Well, if Iran's paying attention, they've learned that the United States doesn't invade countries that have nuclear weapons. So if I'm Iran, I'm going to get a nuke. I mean, look, one of my oldest friends from CIA days, his job was he ran Iranian assets. And he told me 20 years ago, he goes, Iran's going to get the nuke. No matter what we think, what we do, they're going to get the nuke. They've got the technical capability, both from the scientific and from the engineering standpoint. They're going to get it. The question is, are we trying to create a situation where the war becomes more likely, or are we trying to figure out a way to defuse this thing? And that's the problem. It doesn't matter whether we're talking Iran, North Korea, China, or Russia. We cast every single one of them as an implacable enemy that there's no other solution than either to militarily defeat them or humiliate them. You can't talk about negotiation because our presumption is there is no foundation for actual negotiation that would be serious, that would respect that they may have some genuine interests we have to take into account. Oh no, we've got to treat them as an enemy. And yet, here comes the problem that we've got too many people in senior positions in Washington, D.C., both in the military and the political side, that believe that we militarily can just go in there and hit Iran, and by God, that's going to straighten things out. Now, you saw with your own experience in Iraq, which is 1/4 the size of Iran, how difficult it was from just a logistics standpoint for us to try to do something there. And that we think we can go into Iran and it will be a piece of cake when Iran has the actual ability to shut down the Straits of Hormuz.
Yeah.
I mean,
Shut it down.
people aren't thinking this through. It's
No, and and I would even add another portion to that because both my time in Iraq and Afghanistan is relevant since it's literally on either side of Iran. There seems to be no cognition at all that you can't just launch a bunch of missiles into Iran and somehow that's going to, I don't know, cause the people to rise up against and throw out the mullahs. They're still going to be there unless you go in on the ground and take them out. They're going to continue to do all these things and you can't stop them. And then what are you going to do? We don't even have an army that can handle all that on the ground. There's no way. It would take us months, if not years, to build up a force large enough to sustain a ground invasion. And why would we want to even try? It's irrational to the highest order.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, and that's why I say that you listen to Keane say these things. I mean, he got his stars. He became a general officer. He should understand this, and the fact, it's really puzzling. Is he really this mentally locked up in an ideology that he can't even think rationally? He can't step out of the box and look at it, or does he know that he's lying and he's just pushing the lie because there's some financial benefit to be had? I don't know.
I don't know, but if he were the only one, that would be one thing. And if it was just Ben Hodges was only the second one, that would be one thing. But here's another one. Here is Lieutenant General Kellogg. Wow, let him speak for himself. Watch this.
Yeah. Israel has moved past Gaza right now. They've actually shifted their focus to Hezbollah and to Lebanon right now, and you're going to start seeing that more and more with the air attacks, with the attacks on the pagers, the command and control. You're going to see this thing escalating. And I listened to President Biden just a minute ago. There's a huge difference between rhetoric and reality. He's just talking off a card. There's no de-escalation. The Israelis are clearly escalating this fight, and this is going to continue. And with Netanyahu going to the UN, if he's smart, he's going to blow them up. And what he's going to say is 20 years ago, the UN Security Council passed a resolution, 1701, that was supposed to solve this problem in Lebanon. Hezbollah was supposed to disarm. The guy who signed that agreement was Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah now, and they were supposed to move north of the Litani River. They never did it. And I think the Israelis now are committed to finishing that fight right now, whatever it's going to take for them to do it, to allow those 60,000 displaced civilians from Israel back into their living abodes.
Okay, so I'm going to get to this, the Litani River there and the Blue Line and whatever. I'm going to get to that in just a second. But first of all, talking about somebody who should know better, he just blithely said, okay, Israel is going to move on from Hamas. Is that war over?
Yeah, I'm saying. Well, I made that point. I had this acquaintance yesterday who was writing that, yeah, Israel's now they're going to give it to Hezbollah and Iran, and it's going to be a great victory. And I go, can you please explain to me that if Israel cannot defeat Hamas, who's relatively unarmed, doesn't have any heavy
playpen. I mean, they've got them boxed in physically.
Yeah. I mean, you control the territory, you control the air, you got almost total control, and you can't control that in 11 months, and you're going to defeat Hezbollah and Iran? Are you nuts?
And then you may have seen this also about a week or so ago, maybe not even that long. Netanyahu is apparently considering reoccupying the northern part of Gaza City. And I'm sorry, deoccupying it or depopulating it, getting all the people out of there and going back in again so they can, quote, starve to death anyone who remains in there. That's what they're talking about doing while they're still looking to the north.
Yeah. And look, when Netanyahu said, look, we've got to reopen northern Israel. And so we got to push the Hezbollah back. The only way they're going to do that is they're going to have to physically invade southern Lebanon.
Right.
And I maintain they don't have that ability. And yes, even their project of extermination, the Palestinian extermination project underway in Gaza, has failed. They're killing a lot of them, but those people, man, they're resilient as can be. And they manage to somehow, they keep having babies throughout all of this hell, throughout all of this death and destruction. New life continues to be born. And it's an indictment of Israel that with all of its military power and all of the advantages it has, both in terms of armor and artillery and combat air, both fixed and rotary wing, Hamas is still recruiting people and building up more recruits.
Right.
It's like the math on it just doesn't work, because it's not like Israel sitting there on top of with a 3 million man army reserve that it can draw upon. It doesn't have that.
When I was part of our operations in Iraq and in Afghanistan, we tried really hard, genuinely tried to avoid civilian casualties. Oftentimes we made errors and we made mistakes, and I watched how every mistake that we made always created more enemy than we ever killed. And that was comparatively a small scale issue here. But what Israel's doing is just on steroids. We're giving all those who survive every reason in the world to pick up arms and continue to go on. So in my argument, after 11 months of war, there are far more people willing to take up arms against Israel today than there was on October 7th.
Right. Well, in fact, let's do the comparison of Russia's invasion into Ukraine and attacks on military and infrastructure targets in Ukraine against what Israel's doing in Lebanon. The number of civilian casualties in Lebanon exceeds what Russia has done over 2 years. And how do you know that? It's real easy. The video comes out when you've got a bunch of civilian bodies laying around and you're carting them out of hospitals and schools and factories. It's pretty easy to see. And Ukraine's information operation is such that they fabricated some. Remember, they had one early on in the war where they said that the Russians attacked a hospital, but it turned out they were paid actors that were coming out. But Russia has followed the principle you enunciated. They've taken care to not kill civilians, to make sure they damage the military infrastructure. Whereas Israel, they don't care. They kill civilians, and in the process, instead of quelling the desire for revenge, they fuel it, they ignite it.
Yeah. And so I want to look at maybe what's coming next. So that's what Israel still has going on in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank for that matter as well. So those are still smoldering and burning to a certain degree. Now that they have launched this new operation, and so far they haven't crossed it on the ground, but they've set all the stage for it. So as you said, they can't accomplish the goals they have publicly stated unless they go in on the ground. But then the real question is, we're going to look at two aspects of this. Number one, and Gary, I'm going to reverse the order here. Let's take a look at Hezbollah's weapons, because according to the Wall Street Journal today, actually, Gary, if you can throw that up there. It says Hezbollah, which is regularly striking targets in Israel for nearly a year, has kept in reserve a massive arsenal of rockets, drones, and anti-tank missiles that it can deploy. Then it goes on to say that the among its most dangerous weapons is an Iranian-made anti-tank missile called the Almas, the Persian word for diamond, which gives Hezbollah a much higher degree of precision in its strikes than we had fought in the war in 2006. So far, Hezbollah, and we've been talking about this, everybody has in public since the war started in Gaza, that if it ever got to it, Hezbollah has somewhere around 150,000 missiles and rockets, many of which are the good stuff. We haven't seen almost any of the good stuff so far. So the question is, has Hezbollah been cowed? Or are they withholding for now? How do you see that? And is it, or do they not even have it? Has it just been a ruse?
No, I think strategically they've been keeping their powder dry. They recognize that Israel's strategy is to try to provoke Hezbollah and Iran into taking actions that would reach such a level that the United States would have to enter the war on Israel's side. Because Israel recognizes, just like Ukraine does, its only hope is to get the United States involved directly in the war, hoping that somehow that will bring enough firepower to their side. Now, it's a foolish strategy. And the irony is that both Israel and Ukraine, who are in different situations militarily, are pursuing this. And that's why you haven't seen Israel launch full force already into Lebanon. They're trying to, they're baiting Hezbollah. But Hezbollah, for its part, it's been hitting farther and deeper into Israel with rockets and missiles and drones than ever before, and we know it's being effective because the government of Israel has imposed a complete media blackout. No reports allowed. One BBC reporter did. I heard this. I was talking with Alistair Crook earlier today, and he played for me a recording. One BBC reporter did manage to get something out, saying that in Haifa there are many casualties, Israeli casualties, and significant damage to an airfield. So Hezbollah is having a military effect as well, without having to come out of its hiding holes and its secure fortifications. And frankly, why would they?
So how much longer can they keep their powder dry when you see that the death toll in the last 24 hours exceeds anything since the Lebanese Civil War, even more than the 2006, and it's certainly in terms of a single day, and they just keep having all these airstrikes, just pummeling in their people on top of the pager strikes and walkie-talkies, all that kind of thing. How much longer can they hold on if Israel keeps up this pace?
Well, most of their key personnel are below ground, so they're not taking the casualties. The ones above ground are just your average Lebanese civilians, and it's doing exactly what you said earlier. Instead of raising the heat among the Lebanese that, we got to get rid of Hezbollah, it's raising the heat that we got to destroy Israel. And so it's an action that's going to be counterproductive to Israel. It's not going to make Israel safer. It's going to put Israel in greater risk, more jeopardy.
I wonder if you can talk about the risk to Israelis' ground forces, the IDF, if they go in a massive way, which, according to the leaders, is something that they have set as a goal, a war goal. So they're going to have to go in there at some point if they're going to push them back from the border. What has Hezbollah done since the end of the 2006 war up to this point, and what kind of military situation might Israel face on the ground just within Lebanon?
So number one, the Hezbollah forces are combat trained veterans. They're not just fighting Israel. They've been up in Syria fighting U.S. trained and funded Islamic extremists, ISIS types. And they've had 10 years of combat doing that. So they've developed combat experience. So they're not coming at this theoretically. They've already had shots. They've been shot at and they've shot back. And they've conducted maneuver operations against entrenched forces. So they know what that's about, number one. In the aftermath of the 2006 Israeli attempt to invade southern Lebanon, which failed, they had fighting positions. They were using bunkers pretty effectively. They were coming up and ambushing Israeli armored columns. But they've now gone beyond that. So they have thought through the entire defense of southern Lebanon, which is, it's not wide open plains. This is not like rolling across Ukraine. You've got to go through mountains and valleys. And so those mountains and valleys, as you know from your experience in Afghanistan, what a nightmare.
Yeah.
Advancing force, because it gives the defending force a lot of options for ambushing, for mining approaches. And then once you get a unit pinned down that they're in the middle of a minefield, then you can hit them from the rear and from the front. It's just a nightmare scenario. And how do you fight your way out of that ambush? The Israelis, the one thing they do have is they have an advantage with air power, but Hezbollah has been very cautious so far about revealing their own capabilities to counter that air power. So
I've heard it suggested that one of the reasons why Hezbollah has withheld its fire so far has been because they actually want to draw Israel onto the ground, because that's the only way that they can actually do harm to the IDF, as opposed to going on an offensive. They can't advance into Israel; they would be just mowed down. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, no, exactly. They're not an offensive force, and we sort of got evidence for that going back 24 years. I think I mentioned before on your show that the Israeli Foreign Ministry published every year the statistics of attacks on Israeli citizens by Palestinians, by Hezbollah. The Hezbollah launched rockets and missiles into Israel, but they weren't hitting and killing scores of people. There's very few casualties from that over the years. But Hezbollah has been insistent upon that the Palestinians need a solution. They need a state, and Israel has been wanting to destroy them. Hezbollah it's a powerful political force in Lebanon, because it's not just military; it's political, and its reaches go in, as I mentioned earlier, to education, to healthcare, to social services. So it's really a government entity in and of itself, but they are going to wait for Israel to come to them.
Okay, and so now let's look at the next part of that equation, because one of the reasons why Hezbollah is so powerful is because of the backing of Iran. So in that sense, some of the claims that Jack Keane makes and some of these others does have a grain of truth to it, that without Iran, the Hezbollah would not be anywhere near as strong as it is. So the question is Iran going to enter on this on behalf of Israel? I'm sorry, on behalf of Hezbollah against Israel, because Iran has clearly been doing everything they can to avoid war, because they know that power upon power, when we add everything up, even to Israel, that they're an inferior military force. And if the U.S. comes in on the side, it's certainly going to be that way. But in your assessment, what would it change the dynamic for Israel to where they would actually engage? Is there a place, or will they stay out like they did in 2006?
Well, one, I think it's important to understand that the relationship between Iran and Hezbollah has changed over the years. And it's changed in much the same way that if you had a 5-year-old son and now you got a 25-year-old son, well, hopefully that 25-year-old son is still not behaving and sucking off you like what the 5-year-old did. Where the 5-year-old couldn't actually go out and get money on its own and do much on its own, had to be educated, had to be raised. Well, once it's grown up and adult, it's independent. And that's exactly what happened with Hezbollah. In the early stages, in the 1980s, yes, Iran played a very important role in Hezbollah, in equipping it and arming it and training it, etc. But in the 1990s and then into the 2000s, Hezbollah came into its own, which is one of the reasons that in that 2006 Israeli incursion, you didn't see Iran jumping into the middle of that fray. They stood back because Hezbollah took care of business on their own. They didn't need Iran. And they're now, so Iran and Hezbollah are in more of a collaborative relationship these days. And yes, there are some supplies and weaponry that Hezbollah will get from Iran, and Iran is quite willing to share it with them. But as far as the economic side of the picture, Hezbollah has actually made, they've got a lot of money. Some of it's involved with product counterfeiting, and black market activities. They've been very active there. But it is now, they're more of an independent force.
So,
Iran,
but is there a point to where Iran would, what would have to happen for Iran to actually strike? I would guess that they would feel that their security would be imperiled, or that maybe that Hezbollah would not be able to stand on its own. How do you see that?
I think it would be the only situation in which I see Iran intervening on behalf of Hezbollah in this is if Israel used a nuclear weapon. I think it would have to be that extreme, because at this point, Iran's not looking to get into a war and to quote, conquer the Middle East. It has been holding its fire in part thanks to the counsel of the Russians, because the Russians are, recognize that the West is really in sort of a desperate situation, particularly as illustrated with the failure to handle the Houthis in the Red Sea. So, they're stepping back and looking at this rationally, saying, look, I know these guys talk a big game and they pretend that they're going to be everywhere doing everything to everybody, but they've got limits, there's serious limits on what they can do. And Iran holds a lot of cards. It can, if the Houthis can shut down the Red Sea, the Iranians can close the Gulf, the Straits of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf, which then kills global economy. Or they can ensure that the only oil that comes out of the Middle East is going to China and India, other members of the BRICS.
Yeah.
But nothing goes to Europe. So, Iran still holds a lot of cards in this. And Iran has been the convenient enemy for the West. That we've held it up as the one that it's the cause of the unrest. It wasn't Iran that invaded Iraq twice. That was us. And the first invasion was done because Saddam Hussein, a guy that we funded, that we armed to attack Iran during the Iran-Iraq War, suddenly he got out of line. He asked April Glaspie, you guys got any problem if I go into Kuwait? And she said, it's not none of our business. Well, it turned out it was. And then all of a sudden, Saddam becomes, our enemy number one after we had enabled him for more than 20 years. And that's what we don't understand. The rest of the world sees this and they're trying to figure out, what the hell are these Americans trying to do? One minute these guys are their great buddies and the next minute they're their great enemy. And they said, so I know I don't want to be friends with them because
we'll see. I think it's lots of categories in that from the past as well. In the last segment here, I want to look at an interesting dynamic, I'll say, where a lot of the Israeli senior leaders, with lots of gusto, with lots of enthusiasm, with lots of power behind their backs, whether it's from the United States or their own stuff here, keep portraying themselves as this innocent victim, like we haven't done anything at all. And I want to show you a couple of clips here. One which you may have seen, one which you may not have, but they're very much definitely connected. First of all, here is Naftali Bennett earlier today on U.S. media talking about how their objective is to destroy Hezbollah. Watch this one.
What you're seeing right now is after such a long time of us containing hits from all of our fronts. We've been hit just over the past 11 months. Hezbollah, totally unprovoked, shot 8,000 rockets into Israel, killing dozens of Israelis, including killing 12 young children playing soccer. They got no warning. They got no text messages like we do, like we give the Lebanese. And enough is enough. We're fighting back. It's time for Israel to hit back. It's time for us to destroy Hezbollah, this horrible, savage terror organization that, by the way, killed over 240 Americans. And we're doing the job to defeat them. And we're going to follow through on this.
Like we've tried to be reasonable. We've withheld our fire, and these guys have been doing this, but enough is enough, Larry. Come on.
Yeah, well, the fact that he's lying about a lot of this and misrepresenting it is just a whole nother fashion. For example, he cites the death of the 12 children, implying that they were Israeli children. They were not. They were Druze. They were Syrians, and they were likely killed by a wayward Iron Dome missile, not anything fired by Hezbollah, because this was over in Syrian territory, not in southern Lebanon. So, the man's geographically challenged. He ignores, and again, I'll go back to the Israeli Foreign Ministry's own numbers in terms of number of Israelis that were killed by, quote, terrorist acts, including from Hezbollah, over a 24-year period. It's less than 1,600 people. I'm not trying to pretend that the death of 1,600 people is inconsequential, but up until October 7th, the Israelis had killed well over 9,000 Palestinians. Quite a disparity between, 1,500 Israelis and 9,000 Palestinians. Now we've seen, since October 7th, and let's accept the Israeli numbers as truthful, even though they're not, that 1,200 were killed exclusively by Hamas. The Israelis have killed over 50,000 people. I mean, 50,000.
Closer to 200,000 if you believe the Lancet.
Yeah, well, remember, the Lancet was projecting what could happen at the end of all of this. Part of theirs was a project. They were doing a projection without an actual count, but still, you're dealing with over probably 25,000 dead women and children. So, Israel's so out of proportion within this, and they think that they can kill their way out of this. They can't. They haven't done it in 75 years, and it's not going to happen now, because what they've succeeded in doing is, instead of building empathy, instead of building a support network where some countries that were, they were on the verge of having agreements with Saudi Arabia prior to this. That's not going to happen now. Turkey used to be considered sort of an ally of Israel. Now you've got Erdogan calling for its destruction. It remains to be seen how long the Egyptians and the Jordanians can continue to maintain diplomatic relations with Israel. But if they go in and continue to kill Lebanese civilians at this rate, I think that's likely to accelerate that rupture.
So what do you think about the statement, and how much this reflects actual Israeli policy? Bennett's claim there that the objective was to, quote, destroy Hezbollah. That is a specific military term that's used, and it's a military mission that you're supposed to accomplish. And it's the same one that Netanyahu gave to Hamas. He said they had to destroy Hamas, exact quote. And now then you see, after 11 months, when they have everything contained inside of a fence, they haven't been able to do that. What is the chance that they could ever destroy Hezbollah that has an open-ended northern border and the ability to get stuff in and out?
Yeah, it's impossible, because it's fundamentally a religious movement. Hezbollah, it is the party of God, and they are not doing this out of a political ambition. This is driven by their own version of religious faith, and same with Hamas. Hamas comes out of a different, the Hezbollah tends to be more of a Shia bent. Hamas has been more affiliated with Sunnis, but they all are driven from an Islamic standpoint, believing it is God's destiny for them to prevail. And you can't wipe that out. No more than, the Soviets tried to destroy the Eastern Orthodox Christian Church in the Soviet Union. Guess what? It's back stronger than ever in Russia right now. So despite, 80 plus years of communist attempt to suppress and destroy that kind of religious belief, the same thing here. You're not going to kill your way out of this. That's what Israel doesn't understand.
Yeah. And they just seem to be completely disconnected with that, and with this fervor, even whether it's religious or I know a lot of Jews are actually atheists, but it's a religious fervor that they want to keep going down. I guess because they got the power. Last thing I want to get your view on here is something that's a little bit different source than we normally cite here, but there is certainly a grain of truth to it. Watch this.
What if you really want to experience the full cognitive dissonance and language calisthenics that have to be deployed to describe the Middle East over the last, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, 10,000 years? How we're describing I give you the golden soundbite brought down from Sinai to explain how fucking convoluted this has to be.
What the Israeli government is saying, and the Biden administration is in many ways subscribed to this idea, is de-escalation through escalation.
Or as that is sometimes called, war! That is World War II! Look at the subhead. De-escalation through escalation. I mean, do you even hear yourself? My God, the de-escalation through escalation? That phrase is, where have I heard? It's right out of, hold on a second. Let me see if I can find, hold on. No, it's not in there. Hold on. Let me see if I can find, no, it's not in there. Let me see if I can find.
Yeah, it's ironic because there is a phrase that's called escalation to de-escalation, or no, escalation to de-escalate. That comes from Russia. That's kind of one of their doctrines here. Ironic that Israel is choosing to use that here. How does that play in real life?
Well, we've seen this corruption of language and inability to actually agree upon meanings of words that we once thought we understood, and that playing with language is what George Orwell's 1984 was all about, and Animal Farm too.
Yeah,
that you can't call things for what they are, or what we've discovered, and you and I were talking about this beforehand. When you actually speak truth and describe something that's happening, when you describe that Israel is killing women and children in numbers that grossly exceed anything that was done to them, that becomes hate speech. Where you're making a factual statement, it becomes hate speech. And it's the same way with this deployment. Oh, the U.S. is deploying troops to the Middle East. Well, A, where are they going to go? B, what are they going to do? What's their mission? What have they been asked to accomplish? And it's that refusal to define what it is that they're supposed to do that leads up getting us into wars that escalate out of control. And the only de-escalation that comes from that is once we're finally whipped and we have to withdraw because we realize we hadn't even done the planning required to figure out if we could win it in the first place.
Yeah, and that's so. I mean, we don't have time to go into another subject. Maybe the next time we'll have you on, we'll talk about the Russia-Ukraine war. But I mean, the same kind of thing there about language. My God, the stuff that's been said at the United Nations already by Biden earlier today, and what Zelensky's talking about, a victory plan. That's the same thing going on here. But especially in this particular case here, it's just really troubling because the irony is, Hezbollah does not want a war. Iran does not want a war. Nobody would be happier to get this de-escalated and off the table than those two players right there. But the Israel, supported by the United States, just seems unwilling to have any kind of de-escalation. I mean, we can go into all the reasons, but that's just the irony of it. Despite the words being used by all these, senior Israeli officials, they don't comport to how the definitions that we grew up with.
Well, in fact, I think the deciding factor in this war is going to be the economy in Israel, because Israel is it's in a negative growth territory now. Its GDP is not expanding; it's contracting. And one of its major sources of income over the years have been tourism.
Yeah.
Christians, Muslims, others flocking to Israel to visit the holy sites. That ain't happening now. And with a lot of these reservists being called up for extended duty,
Yeah.
I guarantee you, if they decide to invade on the ground in Lebanon, they're going to have a lot more reservists called up, and reservists that aren't going to be working in the various economic endeavors that put tax payments into the government's hands. And so it's just, again, Israel's entering what I would call a downward spiral, because every step they're taking in this in terms of their military actions is damaging their economy.
Yeah.
It's not strengthening it.
And man, going into southern Lebanon is just like a disaster. Recipe for disaster. It's like us getting sucked into Vietnam. It's an unwinnable situation, and all it can do is exacerbate every single factor you just mentioned.
Yeah. So this may, I don't see Hezbollah doing something dramatic in terms of launching, an attack to assassinate Israeli officials, whatever. They're going to continue to pound Israeli military positions and infrastructure, airfields, power systems, make it impossible for settlers to return to the north. But they're going to wait and see if Israel's going to make good on its threat to invade southern Lebanon. But in the meanwhile, there are a lot of Lebanese above ground that are going to suffer death and injury. But the Hezbollah forces and the key Hezbollah assets, they're below ground and they're safe. And I'm not sure the West understands that, but if they don't, they'll learn the hard way.
Yeah, we will see. And we'll continue to track this situation. I really appreciate you coming on today, Larry. Really do. And we suggest everybody to go to sonar21.com, where you can continue to track Larry and some of his observations and things. You don't have to just wait for him when he's on our show. I know a lot of you really like to listen to his, or at least read his analysis on certain things. You can go check him out there. Thank you very much for coming on today, Larry. Really appreciate it.
All right, my friend. Thank you.
And we appreciate you guys too. As always, we ask you to like and subscribe if you haven't already. That helps us out a lot more than you may think. Also, to let you know that we have our podcast engine running here. Anywhere you find your podcast, at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, anywhere, just type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive. You got to type all of those words in there, and you will be sent straight to it. Also, to remind you, tomorrow is going to be a great day. I mean, we have Zelensky's talking at the United Nations, but here on the show we're going to have Doug McGregor, and we're going to have not Larry Johnson, because we just had him. It's Tony Schaefer. Sorry, I forgot about that for a second. So another fade that a lot of people have here. Be sure and tune in and catch both of those. And to let you know, we are still trying to find out, exactly what was going on. We were not able to solve the communications problem this morning with that Irish fellow that we're going to get on. And as soon as we can get that resolved, we will get him back on, because I know a lot of you are really looking forward to that, and so are we to hearing about it. So we'll be with you on that. Be sure to be watching for anything else we have, and we will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.